Hi, my name is Kitu Gwangwa, and I'm the head of the Windy Brow Arts Center, which is a 124-year-old building in the middle of Hillbrow. And we are the Pan-African Center of the Arts. And each year we have a conversation called Thari, the moral fabric. This year we will be looking at the theme of masculinity and gender-based violence, which is, of course, the current conversation in the country. And we are looking through two artistic works, one which is Text Me When You Arrive, which was directed by Sneh Ngei, and a poem by Retabile Mudibedi called Hubulukehile Kai Hoba Mosadi. We're speaking with a panel of very interesting people led by moderator Azanya Mwendani. So we're looking forward to this conversation, and thank you for tuning in.
Brothers and sisters, friends and family, welcome to the annual discussion here at the Windy Brow Theatre in beautiful Johannesburg. An amazing spring morning, bit of a chill. But here today we are going to be discussing the annual conversation, and the conversation of the moment really is gender-based violence. It's been a topic for many, many months, especially during COVID, being one of the issues that has come and has shown its face and surfaced as an issue that is real. Being in close quarters, really now learning your partner, facing the real kind of frustrations and the real human being behind who is it you're living with, and that is how it's manifested itself within the COVID environment. However, our discussion today really is about framing masculinity and a very uncomfortable part, which is termed toxic masculinity, and how that has manifested itself in our society. And it's a very new kind of understanding of what one element of masculinity is, and not taking away what masculinity is versus femininity, and how the two complement each other as elements of life. But when the toxicity comes into both elements, but particularly today discussing toxic masculinity. This is part of the Thari program, which we run here at the Windy Brow Theatre in Johannesburg. And my guests today are an amazing group of individuals. I've got Sinenhlanhla Prince. He is a director of a beautiful theatre production. Would you call it that?
Yeah,
theatre production. It's beautiful in the sense that it's able to, in 17 steps, detail what women go through. And, one of our colleagues had said, what more can I say without saying more than I have through this production, right?
Yes.
Called Text Me When I Arrive. So we're going to go into that production.
Text me when you arrive.
Text me when I arrive. Yeah,
when
I arrive.
Yes,
Okay, when I arrive. Yeah. Okay. And then I've got Kitu Gwangwa, who works within the Windy Brow Theatre, and she heads up the Thari project. Herself, she is a healer. She is a sangoma, and she is here today to discuss, really help us understand the spirituality of masculinity, the spirituality of femininity, and how it manifests itself in a societal world, understanding the basis of who we are, which is spirit and breath, and how it has kind of transcended, and what the benefits are of just getting back to your spirituality within this space. And then we have Baba Bunt, who is a philosopher, who is an educator, who is an Africanist, a Pan-Africanist, who has done the most to make sure that even our youngest citizens of the diaspora are aware of their Africanism, and how the lessons of the past should be brought back into today, and how we can discuss masculinity from ages gone by, what went wrong, if anything went wrong, and how we can use our Africanness to correct. Pause, correct, as they say in social media. When you go to a social media campaign, you pause, correct. So there's a discussion today, and a few questions that we will ask in it is, how did we get here? How did we arrive at these models of masculinity that are oppressive? And how do we take away how do we take away from this conversation the opportunity to correct? What are the takeaways from this conversation? It's interesting that most conversations that surround GBV are really a lot with just in silos. Men have a discussion over here, women have a discussion over there, right? Whereas in my personal view, I think that there should be an opportunity for the lessons and the conversation to happen together and the reflections to happen separately, right? Because then you're able to reflect on each other's responses to the questions. So we're going to kind of go into that as well. We're going to discuss issues of which cultures sustain toxicity in masculinity, in that sense, and how do we begin to frame masculinity? What is it that we allow to contribute to the positive outcome of such a conversation? So, as a program, Thari aims to engage its members and society at large to recognize themselves as culture creators, right? And I'm going to allow Kito to discuss a little bit about what culture creation really is. We always make this assumption that culture is something that, because it happened in the past, it must just stay in that way. But now you say something like culture creators. It means you're creating something completely new, right?
Yeah, or adapting or evolving, to whatever is the setting, or your current setting or kind of space that you're living in. Thari, in its total name, is Thari, the moral fiber. And it came from my love and passion around fabrics, African fabrics and tapestry, and looking at some of the symbolism that is woven into the fabric. I mean, you don't just use any fabric for anything. There's a specific fabric for a particular time, for a particular experience that a person may be going through, whether it be a birth or marriage. This fabric that's used, clothing that's used for everything. And where does that come from? Who decided that when we're going to get married, or that the Zulu men are going to look like that, and then Xhosa men look like that, or that indigo is, or that white is for white kente, or black and white kente is for funerals and things like that. And what are these things that are, these symbols that are woven into, what do they mean? That these are all, this is a language, this is symbols that have meaning, and people created that. Women created that. They're the ones that sit and weave and bead and make the baskets and make the clothes. And if they could create that at that time, something that we are upholding thousands of years later, we have the ability to do the same according to our space now, our current situation and setting now. We can create a culture that is relevant to who we are right now, because they created a culture that was relevant to who they were at that time. We are the culture creators.
That's very interesting. I'm really glad you said that women are the ones that weave, right? And this is where sometimes the masculinity story, for me, kind of, let me not even say the masculinity, I think the abuse of masculinity comes in, because we know even in nature that there's the female within a species, say lion and lioness, right? She gives birth, she nurtures, and the lion goes out, finds the food. Well, doesn't really find, he goes and protects, right? She goes out and finds the food, okay? he hunts her and so-called gathers her, but she still gathers, she nurtures, she does all of these wonderful things. And then within us, we had those separations, right? And sometimes I think that is where a problem may lie, because it's a separation. Women weave. Why are the men not weaving at that time? Why is it believed that only women were the ones to weave? Where did that come from? Because that's part of this discussion, to say there seems to be this separation, and we seem to be amplifying the separation. The women are over here and the men are over there. You know, even in our own ceremonies, weddings, funerals, there's a women's group here and there's a men's group over there. You know, and this is where I'm interested on, and I'm glad that we're speaking from an African perspective, because this is not a European angle that we're taking. Okay, it's not to say that it's incorrect or it's correct to speak in those kind of silos, but it is clear that as African people, we know and we remember the roles that we played.
Yes, they did that because that was relevant for them in that time. You know, that is the space that they lived in, and that was what they needed to adapt to. They looked at what are your strengths and what are your capabilities, what do I need you to do at this time, and what do I need you to do, based on what you are able to or what you know, because when you know better, you do better. So with what they had at the time, that's the culture that they created for themselves. Today, we don't have the kind of challenges that they had. We don't have the kind of living space environment. We don't communicate in the same way. We don't have the same culture as they had. So is it really relevant to keep up with everything that's from that space? Absolutely everything in that original construct. If it doesn't work for us, we can keep what works for us, because maybe there's beauty, there's honor, there's value in that. But there's things that don't work for us anymore. So we can really literally unpack, deconstruct them and say, okay, what was the original intention? And was the original intention, is it valuable to us now? And can we undo that and create something that is relevant for us now? So for me, I can see that that's what worked then. That's what worked then for them. But is it what works now for us? That kind of separation. Because today you have men that weave, that make fabric, that some of, I mean, literally, New York Fashion Week, how many women designers are there?
Exactly. So there we go in terms of the culture creation and the space we are in and why we are here, and using this particular environment to kind of have this conversation. So let me just go into masculinity. Let's just go into what a dictionary says, all right? What masculinity is, and then let's go into the dictionary form of what toxic masculinity is. So what is healthy masculinity? Because it's toxic, and the opposite is healthy. Read it verbatim: to develop healthy relationship skills, active listening, communication, non-judgmental support, ask for consent, pressure other men to behave in a stereotypically masculine ways, to make sure that we don't pressurize men to do that. Healthy masculinity is feeling comfortable in emotionally nurturing roles, to hold other men accountable who engage in behaviors that are disrespectful or aggressive. Now that's healthy masculinity. And to me that sounds good. I mean, that sounds like a lot of men that I know. I'm not saying that, and I don't like those terms when people say all men are trash. That makes no sense to me. Now, toxic masculinity, and the topic that we're here to discuss today, is thus defined by adherence to traditional male gender roles that consequently stigmatize and limit the emotions boys and men may comfortably express when elevating other emotions such as anger, right? So this is, and what this for me says is that there's, and I'm not sure if I'm quite comfortable with this definition, that there is an innate or something inside a man to be angry. Naturally just be angry. Okay? I'm not comfortable with that definition, so we're going to unpack it now, right? All right, so let's get into what kind of brought us together, which is where we're going to come to you, right? The production that we're going to discuss is called text me when I arrive, text you when you arrive.
Text me when you arrive.
Yes. When you arrive,
Yes.
right? Is really came out through the provocations presented by South African women. Came to the fore. I mean, this discussion has been going on for ages and ages and decades. Hence, we have Women's Month. Hence, we have Women's Day, nationally and internationally as well. So it's not a new discussion, okay, for anybody. And through art, we have now found a way. And congratulations on tackling this issue. For those of you who haven't seen it, I'm sure you can find it online. But I want you to just explain to us what the production is about.
Okay.
Go for it.
Thank you very much, Sister Azali. The production Text Me When You Arrive. It's about three female friends. We have this YouTube channel whereby they use their voice to take out the gender-based violence issues, to tackle your gender equality, to question the religion. Does the religion made to serve men, to question our education system? Like, are we really trying to help or to teach or to educate young boys to respect girls? So basically that's what the production is about. Yes.
Okay. What did you learn about it? I mean, you directed.
Yes, I directed. Yes, I've co-directed the piece with Momo Matsunyani.
Okay.
She's amazing. I've learned a lot from it. Number one, it was very challenging for me to direct this piece. I'm a director. I love to direct. I love to create. I'm a theatre maker. That's me. That's me. But for the fact that I was working with Ali, Zamama Tindela, and Tulsi, and I've been working with them for the past 4 years, if I'm not mistaken. So, but it was easy for me. But the production, they see Peggy Manje. It's more than a friendship built. Like you pay to the current situation, which is so every day you really pep headlines like a man has been killed, really raped, a child raped and killed. So spiritually, mentally, yaglimaza. So can you imagine? I'm that guy with 3 ladies directing the piece about that. reminding me almost every 5 minutes with you guys, and I feel like I'm the part of that church. Not to say ngiyabheda or ini. I mean, man, ngifundile, ngisuke eMpumalanga. Kunezinto engifundiswe zona imithetho ubona ukuthi but I have to unlearn it. Thanks to this production, so kancane our sisters, they are teaching me ziningi izinto engizifundayo and bekuyistory sabo. So you look at figure. My purpose was, guys, I'm going to listen to you and ngizonikeza ama directions. The story said, I don't have a say with no, I'm going to say you need to teach me, guys. But me as a director, before you keep a director, then give my directions, and start to see. But every day I was learning, every day from that. We want to keep our comfort zone, being about this question, but no chance, really. Since I saw, so from that, always it says when I would take the drive, I get call and Pangwa, sometimes I get call a girlfriend, Hambana, and I get over here. I've done now, just like that. So now, even now, I want to feel it, I don't have time for it. But it's a box, the silly man. So even abantwana abanabo sizobafundisa lento ukuthi hey let's be careful. Ayikho into enzakalayo. Ake even ama leaders ethu awuphakama ukuthi asidile ngalento le. Manje no. Yakhonakala ukuthi isana nekhampani supermarket kanje shut down for iviki lonke for whole week. Kune situation so shut down for 21 days. The pandemic ifile. But ayikho leader the gender-based violence, they know it's too much. Let's shut down the country for 2 weeks. I can't shut down. No, much. But every time enough is enough. But to speaking, them saying enough is enough. It's not enough.
What is the enough? What's the beginning? What is the end?
Let's go for it. Let's shut down the country. Let's do something. Let's declare war against gender-based violence. Mangabe kufunakala lapho sifike lapho. Sorry, angisi-fan yokulwana nani, but ezinye izinto mangabe zisiphusha ukuthi sifike lapho, then ukuthi i-stop, akuliwe for our sis bethu, for our mama bethu, for our girlfriends, for our partners. So angazi, but the solution from me, from uSinenhlanhla ukuthi sifika lapho manje. Mabasikhathele, dala sikhuluma. It's enough. Unini, akhuluma kuyashona every day.
So going into directing the project.
Yes.
I'm sure you read the script, you read, the dialogue framework,
yes.
right? Because obviously the script is it kind of mutates as the production happens. What scared you, or should I say, did you see yourself and your actions in that production? And I say this, and let me kind of give context. So when I'm speaking to my counterparts, okay,
yes.
and my male counterparts, I find that they only open their eyes when they realize that the moment they have started to chat up a woman, and the woman says no, they pursue. Why? Because it's in the nature to say, oh, you're playing hard to get, and I'm chasing you, but we don't realize that is the first moment of the toxicness of the masculinity that we experience. Okay? When a man is trying to pursue a woman and she says no, there's nothing wrong pursuing. The masculinity allows you to pursue. And the femininity allows you to have a response. The femininity allows you to pursue, and the masculinity allows you to have a response, right? For me, it's that point you have a choice to step back, and if she really wants to participate, she will also come, and then it'll be a play.
Yes.
And a play is okay,
yes.
Ladies and gentlemen. There's nothing wrong in the play, because procreation at some point must happen in our world. It is what it is, okay? And that is our distinct role in terms of masculinity and feminine, or feminism and being a man. Distinct role. Everything else is a mesh. But in that production, did you see anything that you've realized that I've done this and I didn't know that I was stepping on dangerous territory?
Yes, sure, so IT, sure. Okay, call. As I was saying before, I'm coming from Mpumalanga. As a makita, it's not until parent and no but misery, it takes ages, and then as a born. So now I'm swung into the Mpumalanga. But okay, me, Mr. Nyasabuti approach it. No, call and I was putting the gas. Okay, no, this is then I'm approach, I'm shade. But you can't call her. You need to at the evening kind thing and but imagine I said, baby, ish. That, it was not it was not fun for me. Other than that, it's easy to know. Ngikhule ekhaya lo mama kade ukufundisa nabantwana bontombazana ukuthi baphatha kanjani and ikhaya lothando ekhaya kade ngaliwa khona ngaze ngibona mama nobaba no never so into esifunda ebanganini society nani but ezinye even naturally ngisasifunda thanks to the production and to abangani bami. Yeah. Okay.
Baba, let's talk about the institutions that uphold toxic masculinity. Let's talk about the constructs, let's talk about where masculinity comes from as African people, as people in general. Let us discuss that element, really referencing the 17 rules that the ladies through the production were able to kind of break down.
Sure. No, thank you so much, Sis Azania. I think maybe before I start, let me also say that I think I'm sitting here not because I'm an academic, but I'm a practitioner, or first and foremost, I'm a man who's trying to understand the world I'm living in. I think that's my journey. And then along that journey, I've met incredible sisters and also incredible brothers. And with some of them, we have started some work that specifically targets African men, called Shabaka, Men of Africa. That's one of the programs we've been running for the last 10 years, where we bring men into conversations and dialogues about this and many other issues as well. And I think next to that, I'd like to say that I find it a bit difficult to use the word toxic and even masculinity, because masculinity, first and foremost, it gives us a view that there is a set performance or rule that men must follow. And I feel that the whole objective of masculinity is to make sure that masculinity is only achieved by a small group of men and then everyone else trying to emulate that. And that means a lot of men actually do not feel that I'm masculine, I'm not really belonging, I'm not really defined by it, and very scared. Maybe somebody's going to find out, maybe somebody's going to call me out, maybe somebody's going to see me as less of what this man definition is, which most of us don't even fall into, if you look at how it's often explained. For instance, that you should have money, you should have an incredible job, you should have lots of stuff that kind of emulates and proves that you're a man. I mean, how many of us have lots of stuff? So if you don't, we desperately then reach out for other ways to either impress or to oppress so that others can start believing that maybe we are men. So for me, masculinity is problematic, but also toxicity, because toxic, there's two things for me about toxic, using toxic in the space of discussing how men often behave negatively. First of all, when something is toxic, it was clean, but then oops, something spilled into it. So can we just take that out, or can we just, you don't want to drink a spiked drink, right? Because it's toxic now, but so the analogy doesn't work for me. Secondly, toxic masculinity is actually not a term that is easy to apply on African society, because it actually comes from those Western men who, in opposition to Western feminism, felt that now men were struggling so much to be real men. They were told to pussyfoot around women. They were told to not talk about that they also had it hard. They were scared of feminists in a way. And there was a term, I don't remember who brought it out, but that was called toxic masculinity, in the sense that men must now become real men. So white men started to have all these camps for men, go out in the bush, get back to nature and bring out the alpha male and all of those things. That's a bit far from our reality. But of course, let's get back to, we can't just sit and discuss terms. There is a reality where many women are disrespected, violated, and sometimes even killed, and way too often, actually. So what is that? And I would like to say that what often I feel is missing from these conversations, that I'm really happy that we have begun to have, it's high time. But it's like we just talk about masculinity as if it's the same all over the world. We have a very different experience, and I'm not using it to excuse, I'm not using it because we should have a card that we shouldn't be judged by the same merit or anything like that. But we need to understand that as African men in this world, we have been judged, treated, enslaved, and made differently than many other men. It doesn't give us any other rights, but it may help us when we try to unpack why some of us are angry all the time, why some of us have an issue when a woman actually is strong, and why don't we praise that? Why say, wow, look at this sister, she's moving ahead. But instead I'm like, why is she moving like that? She's pulling my plugs, I'm gonna have to do something. What causes that? And for me, it makes more sense to say broken masculinity, because it was broken. Meaning that we come from societies, and I'm not trying to glorify that everything in Africa's past was beautiful and shiny and peaceful. There were conflicts, but at a much lower level. And I'm saying this without apology, that when we go back in our society, and I'm not talking 50 or 100 years ago, I'm talking about thousands of years ago, we actually had a societal code where women had a very strong role and men had a very strong role. And we interacted. So this is why even our script of masculinity and femininity, it's not you're a man, you're masculine, you're a woman, you're feminine. No, we are beings, and you come in the shape of a woman or a man, but certain things that you are asked to do and certain characteristics that you're supposed to live out. Think about art. Art is in many ways not really a masculine form, in that if we use the the Western form, that's what it really is, the Western expressions of what masculinity is. It is to be intuitive, it is to feel, it is to be emotive, it is to express, it is to communicate, things that we often label as feminine qualities. So men are supposed to do that as well. They're supposed to be artists, and they cannot be artists if they only draw from a masculine energy. Similarly, women also need to tap into masculine energies. Sometimes they need to put their children in place. Sometimes they need to talk to their partner in a certain way that also calls on a certain, what we normally refer to as a masculine energy. So for me, this stoic understanding that men, woman, masculine, feminine, it makes us go wrong. And this is where I'm missing our culture. And again, I'm not just talking about 100 years ago, because we got broken way back. So when I'm talking about our culture, I'm talking about, and I agree with what Siskito says, it's not about going back. It's about understanding what was the grounding of our, for instance, if in ancient times there was a difference between what men did and women did, I think we can work with that, but maybe it's not women must sew, women must cook, men must do this, men must do that. But maybe it's okay that women can do certain things, men can do certain things. What becomes problematic is when we have gotten used to that what men do is important and what women do, it's necessary, but it's not something we can. I mean, that's just what women do. But we'll give awards to men for being brave and being heroic. Women must just go on with their business. That's wrong. So for me, I don't really have a problem that there's certain roles that maybe we could decide are more for men in society or for women. But when it's only that, I think it can get dangerous. And when we think that a certain type of gender-specific work is more important than the other, it goes wrong.
So you're saying then that an institution is actually a personal, mental institution, not necessarily something that was brought in as the institution as we understand is a place you go to, you learn, you sit down and someone gives you a lecture. And it is a frame of mind that has developed over time in all societies, right? So there's no real society that has come in and said, I mean, yes, they when the colonizers came in, they came with their understanding, okay, of how society should run. And they came and we had an understanding of how society should run. They just were not stronger. We are a communal group of people.
True. We were greatly impacted by their
Yes, right? Yeah. Because we are communal, right?
Exactly.
And because we want to learn, so we allow them to come in through, I want to learn about you. But then that infiltration was just quick. It was, like you said, it was impactful. It was like, you know how elephants roam, they don't roam as a pack. They come in like this, there is a head and then it kind of opens up. So a bit of information came in, but I mean, it's a whole completely different conversation, really. But what I am picking up from you is that toxic masculinity is probably then not a male conversation.
That's true too.
It is
a societal ideal.
It's an ideal, right? Masculinity, because again, there's this notion that when a woman is strong, it means she's been through pain, right? And through what you're saying is that a man must feel pain in order for him to feel that he's strong. But when a woman goes through pain, it means that she has become strong, not that she feels strong. But in our reality as women, we feel broken and burdened by the strength. Yeah?
I just really wanted to say something about that and to locate the idea of this gender separation. Because how I remember African history is not as maybe peaceful as you outlined it now, or it made it sound. For me, it's really a war. Like it's a life and death. You had to adhere to certain rules and standards and ways of being, or you would get killed. And this understanding of gender separation really goes back to Europe in the 1600s, where the time of enlightenment happened. This is called the Age of Enlightenment, right? So this is the idea where Europe is just bulging with ideas. But the problem is that many of these ideas are based on a strong gender bias, where women are completely put down and men are just put up. So when we even today say things like, if your woman is disorderly, or if she provokes you, you must keep her in your place. Those are things that were said in the 1600s. It's not even our voices. And what disturbs me is that these are ideas that also created a lot of things we appreciate today. So medical field, strategic thinking, science, industrial revolution, all the things that we feel we benefited as a world today. Actually, if you unpack each one of those components, there's an element of what we're talking about today as toxic, or as I would like to say, broken masculinity. So we have kind of embraced it, but we want to say, let's keep all of this, but just take out those small elements that are toxic. It doesn't necessarily work that way. So I like what Snare said when he said we need a war against GBV, or violence against women, or violence in society. We need a war against that. But I think what many of us may not be prepared for is that if you really wage that war, you need to question capitalism, you need to question the church, we need to take certain pictures down from our walls, we need to pray differently, we need to do things that we have gotten used to, that no, I don't want to change this. But then you're also saying you don't want to change the situation that causes this.
I think for me,
no, go for it.
I think for me, what you're saying, in what you're saying, there's a lot of important things that you're saying, right? In terms of the very institutional structures that we depend on today. My problem is, at the same time as recognizing the toxicity within the institutions themselves, there's a complete erasure of women's involvement in building those things. So you're talking about strategic thinking, you're talking about the very first, and we can even look at it, that why we have national intelligence, I mean, the root of that is women, espionage is women. So when we look at that, and we erase all of the women's contribution to all of the very structures that we depend on today, that for me is an issue. So we can begin to bring in that, because we see all of those things we depend on, we see how women contributed, then we unpack it all again and see what the toxicity is in there. So which one do we do first? Which one is more important?
Which one is more important? So it comes back that there was a moment in time, a recorded moment in time. Let me say recorded. And recorded in the Western space, which they, unbeknown to them, they actually defined a moment as to when men actually felt like, I feel inadequate, right?
True.
And what then, from your explanation, happened is that I'm going to show the world who I am as a man, as a collective man, not to say singular man, but as a collective being, that they felt threatened. So if the woman in my home is going to threaten me by being stronger, while whatever happened in, whether it's a spiritual thing, whether it's a physical thing, or whatever happened in that moment of the 1600s, such that they felt like, if that can happen in my space, what about the rest of the world? What can the rest of the world do to make me feel inadequate? Hence, I'm going to go out and make sure nothing else goes wrong in that space. I'm going to go and do stuff, right? Because the colonization was not women. They didn't get onto a ship and travel halfway across the world.
But let's remember that also, that in the moments of colonization, we were all gendered into the script of what Europe had conceived as feminine and masculine. So the masculine force of Europe comes and just destroys Africa, which becomes a feminine space, because the feminine space in the European analogy is the invaded, the colonized, the disempowered. So as men and women, and this is where the point that you said that we also need to have a conversation together. We can't just say, men, go over there and fix yourself and come back when you're ready. It doesn't necessarily work that way. I definitely believe that men need to take charge of certain conversations and really analyze ourselves and understand ourselves, but we won't be able to do it on our own. So for me, that moment of what colonization has done to us and normalized the death of black bodies, the death of black minds, not expecting anything from a black being, learning that a woman is less than me. That's what many of us have learned. And that doesn't excuse any of our behaviors, but it comes from a place that I feel like we often do not really want to unpack, because it sounds like you're making an apology for black men. And that's not what I want. I just want us to be real about what happened to us, which is different from other people in this world.
Wow. So we're going to be joined a little bit later by Bob Joshua Maponga, who is, he's a bishop. So he will give us a faith-based and a particular faith in this conversation is Christianity. That and understanding from that angle, he's also a motivational speaker. He's also a philosopher, a leader, musician, and a social entrepreneur. So he will bring into this discussion a particular angle of faith, of religion in particular. Let me define it as religion in that conversation. So he will join us just now. So the question I think we need to ask in terms of this environment that we're in, creativity, and we're at the Windy Brow Theatre, I mean, come on now. Okay, is how is art changing the conversation of gender-based violence? How is art inspiring change? And is it a vehicle that makes the change a reality? Snap, through the production and many other productions that are going to come out of this, and I really hope you continue on this path at the very least, is to then kind of unpack and maybe also from yourself, I mean, how has art, been a conduit to change and inspired conversation, if at all it has, and if it hasn't, why hasn't it?
Wow. If it hasn't, that is not a reality for me. I have not experienced that. Where art has not been a catalyst to change. My entire upbringing is that and understanding that, and the entire makeup of the importance and the intricacies of influence through the arts, in influencing culture, influencing society, influencing politics. So I have a very deep understanding of the importance of the arts in terms of having conversations. What I feel, there's a space where you have people who need to recognize that and be able to consume it. And I feel in our country, we really need to nurture the understanding of the arts, being that vehicle. And what is painful is that should there be budget cuts or financial issues, the arts is the first to go in a school, And a production like Text Me When You Arrive, I feel is a production that should be seen at schools, at all levels. It's something that should be populated and used as a tool of instruction. That should start conversations, whatever it may be, wherever those conversations may go. But I feel art is able to frame and put into context some of the difficult issues we face and we really can't find the words for. Music is able to pull that emotion out of you. Theatre is able to put in dramatic scenes, situations where you're like, I've been there, in that space, and just by doing that, sparks that conversation, and there's that catapults into something. It's very important for that conversation.
And from an ancient time, how important was art to discuss social issues? And in modern day, we call it political issues, we call it social, but how important was it in ancient times?
When I look at ancient Africa, I'm really amazed how we have misremembered the role of art. We have become a people that I feel often we portray our art for a certain stereotypical appreciation. So we often cater to a world that is different from us, and they think women carry water, they think drums are so exotic. So we kind of, maybe because we feel that's the only way we're going to get paid, we play into that. But then what we also forget is that there's certain dances we don't have to dance in front of people for entertainment, because they are sacred rituals that brings a woman into womanhood or a boy into manhood, for instance. They are not for appreciation and payment. And I think this is where we often go wrong, when we don't know how to use because what I really appreciate with Windy Brow is that they are a force to bring culture into the lived experiences of what people in this neighborhood in Johannesburg is going through right now. Violence, poverty, issues in the family. That's what Windy Brow really wants to do. And that's the role of art, to be the pulse of what's happening and actually be one step ahead. So if it's protest, theater is there. If it's political awareness, theater is there. If it's to ask tricky questions that borders on our spirituality and our ways of thinking that we don't really want to confess, to come and see a play or a dance or a music session around that, it starts to make you think. And that's the role of art. And when I look at our African culture, that's what art did for us. That's why expressing yourself was so important. Not to be bigger than, not to be, it wasn't in a class system that I feel sometimes art has become now. It's expensive to go to a gallery and buy art, it's expensive to go to certain festivals, it's expensive. There's a threshold that is not for the regular woman and man. And I think that's where art needs to be. It needs to be in our society, in our daily lives. And that's the code that I feel Africa always gave us.
And it did. It wasn't separate from us.
Holistic.
It wasn't art. It was life.
It was life.
Right? It was an expression of life. It was a communicative tool. Right? I mean, you know, in many indigenous findings, right? Oh, there was wonderful stone artwork. It wasn't art. It was a story. It was a story.
How can you not do art?
It was a GPS. It was, we are here, and it's documentation. It is, I'm saying I was here. It's not art. But the way that we have been so, I think our mindsets have been, we pulled out the separate and put it there. And maybe that's the reason why, you know, people don't see it as important anymore, because it looks like pictures. Right? It's not, what you're saying, it's not pictures, like it's not dance, it's movement, it is communication, it is, you know, taking what's in my head and putting it on something. It's how I breathe, it's how I move. So essentially, it's not necessarily how art has been able to define or to help inspire. It is now our understanding of that's what it's called. It's called art. It helps us move, because you know it's a moment in time. You know, go and watch a theatre production of it, and then I reflect. But actually, the thing of art is all around us. Okay, so what I wanted to ask you as well is taking all of this. How do you want this construct of art? But how do you want movement, breath, you know, communication, art? How do you want it to transcend and to help, you know, deal with gender-based violence? To go and say we need a national shutdown for, you know, the protection of women and children. And little boys as well, and men. I mean, it's gender-based violence is not just a women's thing, it's just predominantly in that space.
Please come again. What's the question?
The question is, how do you see your trajectory in the space of art? But how would you want art to inspire? What do you want it to do? As
normative activist, art, especially in creator. It's about the protest theatre. It's about who's a question that are comfortable with leaders. So, in the painful part is shutting the doors. So the space about our second production by producer much. First by currently called is protester Papa was niggas and somewhere. And even a man must come on platform so it's just bullet. So sometimes we need some three targets and I see say equal in and Funa theatre houses of another windy brow. But guys, Ian, nothing to Angie, Vula, nothing come among, but never by. So here's going to be difficult for us. There's some upcoming actors, upcoming creators, upcoming thinkers. So now shut that down. Kubanzima, started from school, they made a spill, they made a survive, they made a spatala marent and swing Pumana, so we don't go for the Pumana, it's not like achievement. So thank you for space, thank you for the opportunity. So Sabating on the Bafana now cool and this cattiness need. So Mina it's the driver or you bus. Then the swings which influence even more. Yet a space of an I want to find out a skid. Would guys say one days and still push? I'm not saying I'm fighting for sisters, I'm fighting for myself, I'm fighting for upcoming yeta makers. Like as he banned Islam, so then must not want to I was guided umbrella. She's a woman and it's not being see hijack young the system about art. It's usual service. Guys made us change. And even the magic change. Even the magic art. Kind of art. the gurus abantu bani khona abangathi banesandla semvelo, meaning khona abenza izinto ezinsnacks, khona abahlukumeza abantu besifazane, khona benza ini, and bayaningi, and bayaphuma kancane kancane bayavela in the theatre industry. Iqala ekhaya, iqala ngakuthi okay asifuna ukubheka ukuthi kuma-minds ebenzani, no siqala la ukuthi siyeklina manje, then masisisharp, then siyaqhubeka-ke senza lento ehlezi siyenza uku-influencer, siqala ama-conversation because i-art is a main source of change. Uyibona ngami yiyo masibalekela siyalimala, and then shut down thina ama-coming artist siyalimala.
So, that's loaded. So, this production in particular,
Yes.
when it has gone out and it has been seen by everyone, what has been the strongest response or the toughest response from the audience? Yeah. Whenever you're director, you need to write some Q&As.
Yes.
Ne?
Yes.
And write some Q&As with Abu sisters.
Yes.
And with yourself as a director and maybe the writer. But in Lemon Q&As, what has been the most inspiring outcome, but also the toughest moment for the audience? And is it from men mainly or from women?
The toughest one is a response to Amachita. Like, iyabathusa ngoba into esiphila kuyo, into abanye abazenzayo, so iyabathusa, oh shit, abanye they are not even aware of I'm doing this and ayikho sharp, then uba aware ngalesi sikhathi leso as a director ngihleli nabo audience mabona ukukhile, oh wow, shine before production iphela, and it's a satire, siyamanje into it's kakaka party iyafika siyadubula, you know what you're doing. So leyo yiyo futhi yamachita. Then our sisters ngithanda the Africans ngoba reacted to a piece or basho njalo I feel it, yes, into enenzayo ngitshele in the show, during the show, yes, your boyfriend yakhe, so now okay, that's nice, siyafundisana. Then bese kuba khona futhi another thing, learn sometimes we're attacked as I give the director. Why we direct a piece so we out, number one? Why? And why? Most of the time I don't like Q&As in business because of some protector labo and some guys protector in a piece of my sisters. Why? Wasn't it?
So who's saying that?
No, sisters.
They're asking you to write.
No,
you have no right.
Exactly, you have no right to speak up us or to share our stories or to do anything, to even touch our stories. But guys, now I'm big but they're like, no. So you challenge now as a director, especially my creator with director. We comrade now, no sisi, now mama chair, and I want to change it. Yes, I'm part of the church. Yes, 10%, but we treasure funda to do better. Funda every day. So keep the moment you keep by the moment silimaza young the conversation, silimaza. We are doing the same thing but on a hill. So when I see a family, I don't know if that makes sense to you.
No, completely.
Yes.
Sure, definitely.
No, completely. It's important that it's not just a women's discussion and it's not just directed by women and it's not just a production by women. It's a production by everybody because it affects everybody, right?
Yes.
And my reference of why I have a problem with silo conversation is because the only reference you have when listening and engaging in dialogue in a female-led and contained conversation is your reference point. The same way a male-led and a male-contained conversation, the only reference you have are the women in your space, right? So you don't have the opportunity to see the reactions, like you have seen the reactions of different people in the audience. You don't have the opportunity of the reaction of the woman over there speaking to me, but if I turn my eyes this way, I can see the reaction of another lady here who's also crying, a man over there who's also crying. So then your reference points expand, right? Because all you actually have is your aunt, your mother, your sister, your friend, maybe the teacher. So you don't, and you've never had to engage with them because they've hidden from you their true feelings. All right, to protect you as in their space, or you're just comfortable with them until you're used to seeing, but you're not used to seeing the wider responses to the conversation. And that's probably why I'm one of those who says that we have to have these open conversations. So kind of segueing into that, we're going to bring in Bob Joshua to discuss that. We're also going to now discuss families within the construct of masculinity, femininity, toxic masculinity in particular, but also what is feeding this monster. Is it our society? Is it our families? Is it TV? Is it religion? Is it faith? Is it spirituality? You know, to be able for us to get to a point where, you know, in the next segment we can start talking about the solutions and how, you know, what are our ideas. We're just a few people in society, but we're hoping that this conversation will broaden people's minds to ask different questions, to interrogate 1600 and what was, you know. Oh, but by the way, that's not our calendar. I'm just putting it out there.
That's also true. So there's many layers.
Many layers to unpack, yes. But I mean, no, those were other conversations. But I mean, right now we accept that the calendar we're working with is a particular calendar, so the 1600s of the time. So we're going to bring in Bob Joshua into this last bit of the conversation before we segue into the solutions element. So now we're going to discuss religion and how the concept of family comes into masculinity, femininity, and if it's an influencer in the toxicity of masculinity in this construct. We have spoken about the institutions, we have spoken about art, but we haven't really gone into the immediate community, which is family, okay? And how from birth up until, moment of passing, how that relationship, the first relationship you have is that with your mother. And then it goes into the family, and you are conditioned, you are taught, and in the family construct there is religion, there's faith. In there are rules, there are limitations. We have to kind of understand that there is an influencer there when it comes to how things become toxic or how things remain clean. Bob Joshua, what is it about the community of family, the community of religion, and the broader community affect masculinity as a way of life versus femininity? And as femininity, and now we've agreed, I think, that it's not about men and women in the terms of masculinity and femininity, but we understand that in this discussion, masculinity is meant to be talking about the male part of our society, and femininity being the female part of our society. But from being a bishop as a primary role in your life, it's not necessarily the only. What have been the dynamics that has influenced where we are now, where we have gender-based violence?
I think to start with, it will be very important to discuss human life in totality, without necessarily masculating people or making them feminine. Human beings must be human to start with, so that at the end of the day, we're not going to be dealing with upgrading women, downgrading men, and a few years later, the men are now 60 kilometers behind. Let's bring them back to the platform. Then the women are now too powerful. This tug of war on its own only tells us that there's a social problem. And I think that the greater part of it, if we spend it fixing the smaller issue, which is bringing gender equality, not humanity equality. And once you talk about humanness, this goes across the issues of gender, the issues of color, the issues of academic segregation, tribal segregation, and everything. We treat each other as human beings. And I feel that it's exhorting and picking one little element of women within a society when commercial issues social issues, spiritual issues, economic access issues, land issues, and many other dynamics which affect this critical issue as to why is the African man turning violent towards his own woman instead of turning violent towards the system that is not giving him the satisfaction and the masculinity that he needs. Now we talk about toxic masculinity, but it must be understood as a foreign idiom, a reaction of the commonly abused men as they are responding to their problems. There's a bigger giant outside whom they must fight. They don't have energy for that giant. So you turn your energy towards the weaker vessels that are in the house. The question again, in as much as he's turning towards the weaker vessel, has the problem that is standing outside been solved? So first thing maybe we need to start looking at the social re-engineering of the African man as a total being, the one who used to sit in his village and sit on his chair and feel he's worth something. And you go to work for a house of Mr. Fundamental, and the whole bearded man like myself can be called boy. Hello boy. And you reduce me to that. And that's because I must get some money for tax. So when you're looking at the issue of social re-engineering, I want us to become very objective so that we don't end up using petrol to extinguish a fire. Because after we are done with empowering women, let's give you 50 years in this project. Now women are sitting on the 16th floor. They want to get married. First question, where are the men that they're going to be marrying? They're still on the ground floor. So you're going to have lots of professional women walking around buildings with handbags full of vibrators and sex toys. Because in the midst of them achieving the professional space that they are now in, does it come with the emotional? Does it come with the family? Does it come with the husband? Does it come with the... Or now that you can move into a new space altogether of female prostitution at that high level where women now can hire. A friend I've just heard in Senton here, she has rented 4 boys from Alex because she can afford it. She beat up the other one the other day because she found him in a car with another girlfriend on his... So we begin to look at a new dynamic where women are saying we're control of ourselves, we don't want accountability to anybody, as much as men don't. My children are my children, surnames are not important, Lobola is not important, I'm here to run by myself, and etc. So I want us to look in the face of toxic masculinity and look in the face of toxic femininity and actually not come up with the conclusion that is it possible that toxic masculinity, though it is a European construct, it is not actually a result of feminine toxic femininity, which is now a reaction to the abuse of men. So I want just to balance that there are lots of women also who might be calling themselves feminists, but last time I checked, women still love flowers, they love those to be open for them, they love compliments, their emotional psyche lives there, whether it can come as a preference or not. But a society that does not recognize its own women, I don't think it is proper. I'll start there for now.
Okay. So in that conversation, where does the family play that role? What has become the responsibility of family in that?
Let's come back to this piece of stick that my director said it will make noise. This is a thinking tool that I work with constantly to give me a constant view of what the world looks like. So this is my mind on my left here. This is my African perspective of how I think as an African, as Abantu, as Ubuntu, we as Kemet, as our Kebla. That must come first. These are the Chinese, Eastern mysticism, with all their theories of the East. This for me is the Northern, which are the greater parts of the Europeans. And these are the Westerners, who are the Americans. Each one of these sections has a definition of what a man must be and what a woman must be. The 3 spaces you see here represent time. In the past, how was it like? In the present, how is it like? And the future we're moving into, how will it be like? So when you begin to ask me about family, you need to start asking again on the thinking tool and say, what is a family according to the African? What is a family according to the Chinese? What is a family according to the Europeans? What is a family according to the Americans? The Americans have the great I, develop the individual, the American dream to have achieved. The Europeans believe you can substitute people with machines Automate everything. You don't have to deal with more strikes than ever. The more the machines, the happier the society will be. The Chinese have a little bit of this, of their spiritual understanding of the greater community where they are living. Therefore, the Chinese is not about the relationship, it's about heritage, it's about liturgy, it's about continuity, it's about the greater affinity towards their spiritual realm. But in the African space, it's about our socialness, our ubuntu, umuntu, ngumuntu, ngabantu. My progress is our progress. Unfortunately, many of us are thinking like this. From the slacking processes, the independent woman, the American woman, the weave, the wig, the lipstick, the long nails, the very picture that we've portrayed is the picture of a woman, the go-getter woman, who listens to nobody, but listens to herself. The Europeans are coming, we know. We cannot say too much badly, but some of them have adopted dogs and cats as husbands and etc. And human beings are just an exclusion. They must be called in when they are wanted, but they must be silent for the greatest amount of time. And most of the European families, it's just me, my wife, and my children, and that's it. Grandfather, uncles, and what and what, not my issue. The Chinese have a similar, slightly different one. They have a strong lineage of inheritance. You killed my father, if you want to karate movies. First thing, yeah, you killed my father. And the grandson is coming to fight over the wars that his father and grandfather has fought. But to the African, the whole community becomes important. When we think like this, we're looking at ourselves from the outside to the inside. At the end of the conversation, it does not matter what the African thinks, because the Chinese can do all the equipment, can do all the gadgets. These are doing all the software in terms of the thinking, and these will do the policies and implement it. And the Africans on the receiving end. I wish our thinking of family, of religion, of economics, of spirituality can be from ourselves as Africans. What do we think? And after we decided what we think, we can always look outside and say, what does the Chinese think about us? What does the European think about us? What does the American think about us? But we are at a point of reflection into ourselves, rather than being passengers in a bus which is going where we don't know.
So what I'm picking up then is that it becomes a system of systems, right? Different systems for, like they say, different strokes for different folks. And depending on your point of reference, masculinity is dissected differently. Okay, that's what I'm picking up. Is that
I've not started dealing with religion yet.
No, I know you haven't started with religion. I'm just here trying to contextualize that because I want to get into the religion. Here, it's we've adopted a different viewpoint, right? We've adopted it. Why? Because 1600s.
Let's not even say adopted. It was forced.
Right?
We would die
Forced
if we
upon us,
choose to think
right? To
differently.
think differently. And what then happened was that a system.
Underline a big word there called the dominant culture.
Dominant culture, right?
And the dominant culture is abusive.
Yes, it is abusive.
To the smaller cultures.
But what it has done is like, even in that environment where the man felt that he was now being disempowered, yes, it is from a European context, but you also find that in the African context, through what has happened here, the African man has now felt, from what you're saying, that I now feel disempowered because of the viewpoint of my African society has been shifted. Our trajectory has been moved on purpose. So it is almost like it depends on the system within which you live, within which you breathe, that your interpretation of masculinity, toxic masculinity, and toxic femininity as well exists. Religion. How has this tested religion? You know, there's always the talk of the good book, okay? The good book of many stories. You know, but we all know that the good book, as they call it, is a story, like I said, a story of stories, and it's not necessarily about one person or one being, but how has religion been tested? How is religion influencing this particular discussion? How is it concealing? What is it revealing in this process, and what next?
Academically speaking, and allow me to take that slant, that will correct as much as we're educating on the same platform. That when you speak about religion and founding or finding its basis on the greater biblical text, which becomes a Hebrew text, which becomes an African text, which becomes a North African text, as the first form of thought, with its rules in the greater space of Judaism and Hebrew and Messianic Jewish traditions. The second level is the Ethiopian platform, which finds the Hebrew faith now fully adopted into the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, with its own writings also. And by the way, 800 years older than the KJV is the Ethiopian Bible, which is the KJV is the plagiarism of the Ethiopian Bible, with the exclusion of other books.
Yes.
That will be a conversation for another day. And with the Ethiopian perspective, you have another structure there, totally, from deity to worship to function. Then you have what I call Romanism. These are just centuries of conversation. Romanism is now when Christianity became popular in Rome, and then it found itself as the mother of all religions for Europe, installing kings and removing them. During the times of the Bolsheviks, you can go to the times of the Crusaders, you can go to the wars of Charlemagne, you can study the history of the Anglo-Saxons, the Francophones, all the wars and the kings of Europe as they were paying tribute to the priest of Rome. So when we were busy being colonized in Africa, the tithe of colonization is actually It's actually, as we speak right now, it is actually stored in Rome. The Jesuit community is an alive community that actually benefited directly from colonialism. It might not sound nice, but that's true. The Catholic bishops' hands are dripping with blood of the Africans and the Caribbeans. It's a fact.
Yeah.
So don't come around and say, holy, holy, holy. Just stop it, go downstairs, remove that gold, and deal with the problems that are created. Because actually, in terms of slavery, are you aware that is the Catholic Church that gave the Spanish the permission to actually run slavery? The Catholic Church themselves. And you come around and try and play a saint around the block, that you are here to be representing the Jesus on earth. We need to start cutting some of this bull dust away from our faces. So you have the Hebrew-based faith, Ethiopian-based faith, Romanism, as it appears. First Protestants are the Anglicans. That started up the organization of the Anglican Church, where the British government, as it were, the British monarch decides to hell with Pope, we're going to start our own thing. That becomes the beginning. So the first Protestant is actually the Anglicans. From the Anglicans with the European Church, that makes the next five now. Times of the Martin Luthers, the times of the Zwinglies, the Calvins, Methodists, for example, the John Wesleys, and etc. Then you move that Christianity from persecution of Europe into America, the beginning of the New Age. I want you to notice how this Christian thing constantly is evolving from Israel to Ethiopia to Rome to Europe. Now it is in America. And in America, it comes in as mainstream. A few years later, it branches into two, Pentecostalism and evangelicals. From those Pentecostals and evangelicals and mainstream, then they headed towards Africa at the beginning of the 19th century. Now coming to make Africa Christian. Point of correction. Christianity got here before the Europeans got here. We have names of God, the Creator, the Maker, the Holy Spirit, and everything else. Before we were taught that as Jesus and the devil and the Holy Spirit. So when you look at these 6 frames of Christianity, they are all running from one booklet, which they call the Bible. And within this Bible, which is actually a transliteration in some certain cases, Bantu can confirm with me, of the greater Kemetic knowledge system, the laws of Ma'at, which actually 10 of them are taken to write the 10 Commandments. The stories of mother and child, which now become Jesus and Mary, which you find in the greater Kemetic space. The parables of Jesus, as you find them. And you find them written of a man walking on the waters in the greater temples of Egypt. You come back further on to explain even the whole issue of a male God and a female God, which is ancient with Kemet. Christianity comes, bulldozes all the women out of the picture. We have God the Father, masculine. God the Son, masculine. God the Holy Spirit, masculine. So you fill up your deity with all testosterone. You fill up the whole upper room with masculinity as Christians. And then you want Christianity to respect women. When in fact, the same religion is the one that teaches patriarchy, African forms of thinking. It's not the demasculining of men. It's also the defeminizing of women. Because our women, what are they right now except they're dumping size of contraception and etc. And they're just baby carriers for saying the least. Can we still say our women find value in themselves? Yes. Because when you disadvantage the man and the man disadvantages the woman, it is a cascading.
Yeah.
So you can never be talking about men losing their dignity and women maintaining their dignity. And what is the advantage? When a system removes the warriors from the battlefront and puts our women in front to fight the battle.
But we know that there are nations or armies of women back in history that have who have led and still lead armies, of women, and it's only now we're starting to unpack that. So religion then, again, is a system of systems, right? And depending on your reference point, we have been limited. So we can't even say that it's my choice anymore, is what you're saying.
What choice do you have? The software of an iPhone cannot work on the hardware of a Samsung. That's the point of departure. Now, when you take the software of the Chinese, the software of the European, the software of the American, superimposing itself on the African mindset, telling me now who are my relatives, who are not my relatives, defining for me right now who is my wife and who is not my wife. Until you put a ring on her finger, she is not your wife. And in African culture, when the father says, "He is my daughter," that is becoming your wife. How do you take all these foreign concepts, constructs, worldview, and impose them on the African? And at the end of your imposition of that mindset, you expect the African to become real.
So toxicity is the influence of something else into something that's pure.
Purity is pontificated when you use it in that framework, because by saying that Europeanism is pure, you're actually indirectly saying being African is dead.
And vice versa? Is that argument valid?
Only when the one who is writing the book writes it in the color of his own language, then history can take form to represent those it's written about. We cannot say purity is measured by an outsider relating to you and telling you the dictates of who you must be. That becomes abuse. That's what was psychological sodomy at its best.
Baba Gund, your input?
On
Frame of reference. Frame of reference, taking the institutional conversation, taking the historical conversation, catapulting it into today's world where, like we spoke about earlier on, we are advocates for indigenous knowledge systems, however, we are slaves to our devices, all right? And knowing that the devices have their own limitations, and again, like you said, depending on who the author is, of the information you're pulling out of those devices, what is your take on that? Because that influences the level of toxicity. I mean, this glass of water, as far as we know now, over many centuries, is as pure as it's going to be, right? It is what it is. It's not pure of many years ago, but you putting a dye in here, it becomes toxic because someone's influenced it.
Yes, and what I was adding to that conversation is that more than just a drink becoming toxic, it's broken. The whole glass is broken. Somebody does this and says, now you drink from this. and you drink from this and you get all kinds of scars.
Yeah.
That's the picture that works for me, because even when we talk about African men, I think that Maponga is making that reference as well, that an inherent design of the colonial system was to make sure men were infantilized. Men should not be men, whatever that is. We can have a discussion about what it is, but it was very important for the colonial system to make sure men would not be seen and be able to articulate a masculinity or a form of manhood that would be functional and trustworthy. And think about what this has. Again, I'm not deferring the responsibility to someone else. I'm just locating, that's why I call it broken, because somebody come with the design and say, you know what, this is just too good. This is working. If you continue this, we will not be able to enslave you. So we need to crush you. We need to break you. We need to destroy what you have and make you believe that whatever you had before was never really functional, so you would want to have what we have. And in many ways, that's what we have become. So my problem is when we use, and I'm not saying there's nothing within Western thought that is completely useless. No, what am I saying? I'm not saying, that there's nothing that is absolutely void of usefulness. But what I'm saying is that we have become so used to Western thought. It's at the fore of our brain capacity that we need to have a period of questioning. What do we mean when we say men? What does, for instance, we're discussing Ilobola. We're discussing Ilobola. Is that patriarchal, or is it a praise and a grounding of a marriage? What is it? Maybe we need to ask, because maybe over the last few centuries we have allowed it to become very Westernly patriarchal. Maybe we are actually some of us going out and buying wives, even if we say that that's not what the custom originally was. But maybe today it has become that, or the experience has become that. Because when we now use money, and this is where, when we mix all these systems, so money comes from a particular capitalist world, at least the way things, what money means today.
Yes.
So when I buy this glass and you say, I also want to have a sip, I can protect this, I can file an order against you because this is mine, it's my property, I can define it. And so people say, defend it, it's yours. So now when I'm using money, in the ritual of getting married to a woman, it's very easy for me now to slide and say, this is my woman, I paid for her. Now where does that take us? So my point is just to say that if we say African solutions for African problems, and maybe it takes us a little while to, because I believe, it was said earlier in the conversation, that we do remember who we were, but maybe it sits under a few layers, and I want us to get there. So for now, we can't just have very what can I say? We cannot not house very bombastic solutions. We're going to do this or we're going to do that. Maybe we need to do a little bit of this and that at the same time. And that's why we need to recognize it's complicated. It takes time. And this is why it's difficult to have this conversation as well. Because we can't say, let's wait and see what happens with gender-based violence. I mean, a few women will just have to die. It's just how it goes. We can't say that. So that's something we need to solve right now. But what I'm saying is, if we really want to solve it, it's not going to happen fast. Because we still uphold thoughts and ways of being, institutions that will continue to produce the dynamics that causes violence against women and of course men as well in our society.
Kit, I can see you.
I'm burning. I really, I appreciate that you said, that essentially what this conversation is about is who framed masculinity. That's what we're trying to find out. What is the original construct of what we say is masculinity? And essentially, what Thari seeks to do is to extract the value of whatever it may have been in its original context, whether that is pre-colonial or post, whatever that is. At some point, there is a version of masculinity that was valued within society, and what is that today? Or what was it, what is it now, and how are we able to then be able to define what is toxic and what is not? That's essentially what the conversation is. Why do we need to do this? Because we are in a state of emergency. As Ulsen and Tanta said. Essentially, we're supposed to wage a war on gender-based violence. So when you're looking at, okay, we need to allocate where the origins of all of this is, and it is this colonial, as you're saying, and all of this. and we have to understand what these men are going through because of colonization, and that it is forcing them, to then, because they are being bullied, and then it, for me, somehow takes away, and you did reference that, some sort of accountability. Absolutely. Because you're saying that men in this state of being currently have not the capacity to recognize themselves in this space as having actions that are not positive towards the greater society. Because at the same time as men were being emasculated by colonization, women were also being, and therefore, yes, there is toxic and there is toxic masculinity, there's toxic femininity, but right now, as you said, the dominant one is the one that is the abuser. And right now in this space, the dominant one is the one that is abusing. So how do we speak to this issue right now? How do we speak to, and I see you're saying your perspective that's coming from the Chinese and from, right now, within this past hour we've spoken, probably 10 or so women, or even more, have died in this very hour. Do you understand what I'm saying? And how do we look at that in this present space now? Because we can go back and forth into history, but right now we're dealing with this issue at this present moment. And help us see together, how do we find the things that we can look into now, what that people can adopt in this present moment. What do I go home and teach my son? And without being judged or villainized for being a strong woman, without being judged and villainized for being a single mother, without being judged and villainized for all of the history and whatever it is, it's the current setting right now. That's kind of like.
So, I'm going to get the two last responses for this particular segment of our conversation. And what I'm happy about is that you're raising the reframing of masculinity, which is going to be our next part of this conversation.
But I wanted to respond.
Yeah, we will. So I'm just.
I'm burning.
I know you're burning. I'm burning. So keep the flames, kind of contained. But like. For the next segment, we have to then start talking about what are the lessons for children, during a hashtag which has gone out which says men are trash, which again it resonates zero with me.
Yes. Deeply hurtful.
It is deeply hurtful, even for as a woman to hear that men are trash. That it makes absolutely no sense. But other people have a right to express what they want to express, and that's why this hashtag is flying around. Also, we will then also discuss, where and how can women feel safe within that construct of masculinity. How can femininity be safe in the construct? Bobby, you have been saying that femininity and masculinity actually are, the same, sides of the same coin, and they have to feel safe because they're one and the same thing. And and what does masculinity look like when it's non-toxic? But before we go into that, let's not discuss it at length. I know you want to be able to,
Yes, I want to explain something, which will be, you pardon me, I must apologize for the illustration, for it will sound very, very gore and crude. But I need to drive this point home. I'm not glorifying anything, so I'll put a disclaimer close on that. But I want to explain a situation so that we understand it in the capacity, the depth at which it hits me. You have a young woman, beautiful young lady, then she is violated and raped by someone stronger than her. Someone who thinks she's not worth talking to negotiate what you want. But you're going to use power to get what you want. The event happens. And the third person that has abused that girl wants to help her to bath herself and clean herself. And he's the one who's going to manage the process of your healing. It can't be more sadistic than that. That's another level of abuse. It was one thing for you to conduct the rape. It's another thing now managing my process of healing on the basis until the young poor girl feels that maybe I deserved it. Maybe. And when still he comes around with lots of gifts and etc. to manage and bribe and manage that situation. I'm just showing this picture as a physical demonstration of what is happening outside, but also as a political conversation that happens to the African children. You're asking me what must we do? This process has taken 400 years, madam. 400 years. No matter how much we can squeak and we run on the table, we need to understand the depth of damage that has happened to the African child. And to get a solution cannot be a remote, press the button and move. You need to change the educational system. You need to change the economic system. You need to change the religious system. You need to change the political understanding. You need to change the spiritual position of people. You need to change cultural norms as of commercializing marriages and etc. So it's a whole issue around social re-engineering at its basics. Now I read a piece of document the other day which threw me off my table. It says, due to the violence that South Africa went through, where all these big trucks and dogs running, eating, ravishing people, kids, 8 years, 9 years, 6 years, 15 years, saw these things happen. White men come with their guns, clobber your father, clobber your mother, kick your mother in the stomach, pregnant as she is, and they do it, and they watch this thing. And at a certain time of that liberation, Africans started feeling like, you are selling me out. You are also selling me out. We started not trusting each other. How did we demonstrate that? By taking tires, put them on each other, pour petrol in the thing, and bang. And young little children at the ages of 5 and 6 and 7, who are now, by the way, 35, they are now 40, who grew up in an environment of political violence. Now, this piece of writing says, go and Google it out, 30% of the entire South African community has psychological problems, post-traumatic disorders.
Yes.
What does that mean, therefore? If you put 100 policemen here, 30 of them, you must be taking away guns from them. Because psychologically, they're still, that's why you hear a policeman went home, shot his wife, shot his 3 children and the dogs and the cats, and he blew himself off. So what's going on? This man is man of the law. Look at our soldiers. Put 10,000 soldiers there. It means that 3,000 of them don't need guns. They need a hospital, a mental hospital. You didn't hear me. Put 100 ministers here in government. It means that 30 of them, they don't need bodyguards. They need to be locked up on a bed to treat their mental trauma. I'm saying this at a bigger level because what we did in Truth and Reconciliation through Babu Desmond Tutu was a tip of an iceberg. Had that process been given enough budget like the Zondo Commission, pardon me for putting two things that might seem unrelated, but to me they are equally sink. If the billions we are willing to spend on Zondo Commission, on how SOEs are being sold, or the same amount of money we prepared in terms of social repair, what do we do to detox the entire South African community from violence? South Africa is not just violent. South Africa is not just a crime. We're violent crimes. Someone walks into your house looking for a cell phone. By the time they're done stealing the cell phone, you all have been raped and you've been shot. If you were looking for the cell phone, just pick up the damn cell phone and get away from me. You want my car? Just take the car and go. No, it can't be that easy. It must be your car. It must be your credit card. Plus, then you understand the psychology of violence. Yes, this is the generation of South Africans whom you want to get a solution for in a few days, in a few weeks, in a few months. Because while we are talking here, it's happening. The question is, how do you detox an entire political system? They sit on the TVs at night, all they're watching. People first switch on the TV, the first thing you see is a man picking up a shotgun. Boom, 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 boom. They shoot everything that they want. Kids are watching Tom and Dick and Harry. They're busy knocking each other, pouring paraffin on each other, and banging each other, and shouting and screaming and squeaking. This is the diet that will feed the African mind with. Over and above the types of violence. Over and above the political violence of these soldiers that are still running on the street. And you expect out of this community to bring up these idealistic people who will fully understand the value of women, fully understand the value of men. I think we are expecting oranges from guava trees. We needed to needed to unwind this thing to a level where if we had the social department in the country, if we had the social department in the country, it must not be just for distributing by distributing
social grants.
Distributing social grants. I think that is the minimum. I need the social department here. I need the Department of Health here. I need the Department of Police Services here. I need the Department of Military Services here. I need the Department of Correctional Services here. All of them in one room. And we can ask them what is the psychological state of the African mind. And then come up with a solution. How do we begin to rebuild a new society altogether?
And it's in that light that I just want to remind us that it's complex and not really easy, but easy at the same time. Like, in a way, what you're saying, Skito, is that we just need to put a stop to this. We can't afford to have a society that kills people. And now we're talking about the killing and the maiming against women particularly. And I agree. So what you, Sneh, called a war on gender-based violence, I'm just reminding my point again, that are we really ready for that war? Because that war doesn't come just singling out violence against women. Because then we need to also think about all the triggers and all the... Because in this society, I'm not trying to defer the blame on anyone else, but let's remember that all our nations are bowing to a man called Trump. The greatest example of misogyny, of racism, of violence in the world. And we have to say, hello, sir, thank you, sir, to Trump. Whether we probably should say a whole lot of other things. So for me, I'm not trying to say that that's the only problem, but it's an indication of the world we live in, where also, and I think that Mapoga was trying to make that point as well, saying that actually for many women who are sick and tired of the violation, sick and tired of always being disrespected, it actually will kind of work for them to be violent right now. Because that's what the society tells you. Be violent. Make sure you kill back. Make sure you take back. Make sure you do. The question is, as much as that is understandable, because when you have been put down for the only reason of being the gender you are, obviously this can become something that you want to do because you just want to get rid of this. The point is, yes, we need some short-term solutions because we cannot afford a society that keeps dying at our own hands. But at the same time, if we really want to eradicate the problem, we need to start doing things that I understand doesn't speak to the mind of those who have been oppressed by this for so many generations. Dialogue, talks, being able to speak together. Yeah. But, and we're going to get into the solutions, I know, but one thing I want to say more about when we get to that is the importance of bringing young people into these spaces. Young women and men who have not really shaped fully their understanding of what it means to be a man and a woman yet, and still want to and are ready for and interested in creating a different understanding, a different symbiotism between themselves. Because at the end of the day, and maybe this is difficult to see in the violent climate we are now, right now, but as a man, I'm not fully a man unless I'm also part of my sister. I'm not talking about marrying you, I'm not talking about being intimate with you. Being my sister, you are a reflection of me. So when I kill you, I'm also killing myself. So if this is what we're going to live with, this is what's going to happen. And that's the colonial design. We should never be able to stand. We should never be able to say, Chinese, you are leaving now. Europe, you are leaving now. America, you are leaving now. Because that's what it takes to take away the triggers of the violence we face every single day.
Systemic. It was systemic growth in breaking down who we were as people. So it won't take an immediate knee-jerk reaction. I know we need it. I know we need it as a society for something to just happen now, you know? For 16 days of activism to be something now and a fix. It's campaigns such as those are not a bad thing because they put light. But how do we systematically get everyone onto the same page? And in the next segment, I think we don't have all the solutions, but in the next segment, we really want to start understanding the solutions that make sense in our minds for a systemic re-understanding of who we are as humans, who I am as a woman, who I am as a mother, who I am as an auntie, as a daughter, in this environment of masculinity, femininity, one and the same thing. So I just hope that from this part of the discussion, you've been able to re-understand or understand slightly differently some of the constructs that you yourself have learned and what you want to unlearn and what you want to replace with information. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next segment.